guns, and my two sisters worked in munitions while I was working in the first aid, and I was working from that time. I was working at from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 11. I worked a full 8-hour shift with time off for lunch, and so we were ready to go at 20 minutes to 11. We were ready to leave at 11. Our shift would be over. When at 20 minutes to 11, the sirens went, and the planes were sighted coming over. And the guns that were along York Street, that's very close to the water, they were firing, and the guns got so red hot they had to stop. And that's how they got over the planes, because they couldn't keep firing, and there wasn't enough airplanes to keep them out. And so there was a lot of places that were bombed. And, did you still want me to go on?
Yeah, go on.
And at 20 minutes to 11, we got the report, and we were in a place where it was bad, because we had a lot of factories, and the soldiers were on the Crumlin Road and all too. And so the bombs were dropping all around us, and people were coming in hurt. And they had to send for the doctors. The doctors worked in their shirt sleeves, the 4 doctors. And they called in the night ones that were coming in, and they called in the day ones. Everybody had to report to the first aid. And it was awful that night. It was just, you were constantly, I was there 18 hours before I got off. And when I got off, there was no home to go to. People were asking me as I was on the way home, where was my father and where was my mother, and I didn't know anything. There was no home there. And I had to go to the police stations, and then we went up to Violet's where Aggie was staying. She was quite a distance away from us. Their home was not touched, and they weren't at home. They were looking for us, and every place was burning, and people were running to and fro, and were just crying and looking for people and wondering where they got to and what had happened. And I had a girlfriend who was working along with me at the time. She lived quite close to me, and we had the shelters built, and all her family went into this shelter that was just outside their home, and they were all killed, every one of them, in this shelter. Her and her brother were safe, and there was another married sister who lived a distance from them, and that was what was left of their family. The mother and father, sisters and brothers were killed.
So how long did it take you to find your mother or find out about your father and brother?
As I say, it was 8 o'clock that morning. I come home and they were telling me my mother was in the hospital. That was the first time. And Richard,
no, Douglas,
he had no clothes or anything. Douglas, I made a mistake there. I'm living in two worlds. Douglas was had no clothes on, and he and my mother were in the house along with my father that night. My father had made them seats, brought in chairs and set them in the coal house, which was below where the stairs were, and this was a good place. It wasn't too bad, and my father was out he had made a bed for himself under the table near the window in the living room, but he would come every so often to find out if they were all right. He would go in, and it was at this time that one of the bombs was coming down. He didn't know it, and he had just been into the coal house where my mother and Doug were, and had asked him were they all right, and was making back to his own, but he never reached there. The bomb struck the house, the whole block of homes round. The coal man, the man who brought the coal to our home, he had his horses there, and the cart that he brought the coal round, and the horse's head was blew off into the ruins of the next house. He had been down just about 10 minutes seeing to the horse to see if it was all right, and had got just to the door of his own home when the bomb went off. Although his home wasn't struck with it, it was shattered and all around about them. He lost his horse and the cart and everything, but his life was saved. And I didn't know where my father was. No one could tell me. And I went to the hospitals, and they showed me bodies and all too. Told me there was no one called Ferris had been brought into the hospital. And then they told me to go to on the Falls Road there was a public bath. They told me to go there and find out about it. So this girl that was working along with me came along, and we went into the baths, and there were soldiers there standing, and the baths had been emptied. And there was bodies all lying with blankets over them. It was terrible to see. And she went over to this soldier, and she said that I was looking for my father, and I was told to come here from the hospital. And he said yes, there was cards on many of the bodies to say who they were, whether they were a man or a woman, you know. And he brought us down to this body, and he said to her, should I show her the body, you know, and she says, well, it's her father, she has to recognize if it's him, you know. So he pulled the blanket up from the bottom, and I could see that my father had no features. His face was just a bloody mass here. He had just been hit on the face and just blown down. And that was a terrible thing, and then he covered him right over. So then I had to go to there was a...
Well, how did you know it was your father?
I knew it from his clothes and all. What he had on him, and coming up, they pulled the blanket up, but he didn't keep it over the face too long because he knew it would be a terrible thing for me to see. So it was, I couldn't get over it. Until I had that special thing that happened to me when I was in the hospital going through the operation. I dreamt of the most hideous faces at night, couldn't go to sleep, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. Do you still want me to go on? Well, I'd be going on, and you need to get the children home. But anyhow, my mother was in the hospital when I went up. I found out that she had been moved till 50 miles outside. I think that was Lurgan at the time, but I couldn't be sure, and I didn't see her. And she had been told about my father because someone had told her, they'd asked if it was right for her to tell her where she was moved. She wondered that my father hadn't come up to see her, and so they told her. And then she was moved out before any of us could get talking to her, and I had to take Douglas down and buy him some clothes. He had no clothes. And how I found out that it was that when I was coming down that morning, after being in 18 hours, and I was so weary and tired, I went into somebody called me into a store that was nearby there, and we knew the people, you know, and she said to me, how's your mother, Dora? They knew me as Dora there. And I said, I don't know. She said, did you find your father? And I said, no, I couldn't find him at that time. That was before I'd gone to the hospital where they told me to go to the public baths. And then I had to arrange. She said, well, I'm sorry to hear about it. She says, we learned that your father was killed, and nobody knows where he's at. And so she said, we talked and she said, you should go to the hospitals and find out. To the police station first I went. They sent us to the hospitals, and the hospital sent it down to the public works, where they had drained and put the bodies in there, and that's where I found my father. Well, then I had arranged for the burial. I had to start work at 3 o'clock that day, and I never got any rest, even though this girl brought me to her home to let me rest. I couldn't, because I had to go up to find what Aggie and Violet were doing. You know, Violet was married at the time, and his mother had to go up there too, and the uncle was up there, and the Johnny, of course, was who she was married to, was the son, and Billy had to go up there too, and it was just a full house when we get up there. And so I started to live with this girl, you know, until we started to find a home. But my mother knew nothing about, you know, till she was told about my father. But we couldn't get up to her. And I had to buy the clothes for father and for Douglas. And then I had to go back to work at 3 o'clock that day. And we settled. And my mother, we had to phone her to try and get in touch with her. And I knew I should have been able to go up with her, but I couldn't, because I couldn't leave the rest of them here, and I had to make all the arrangements because I was the eldest at that time. And then I got the funeral arranged for Monday, and I got time off from the first aid. And the first aid place was filled with people. We kept them in there, you know, because there was people hurt so badly we couldn't move them. We sent the worst ones to the hospital that were in bad condition. We had a little baby brought in that it was sitting in the shelter, one of the shelters, with its mother and father, and they were killed, and it had shrapnel in its head and other injuries and all. We had to send it right off to the hospital. I never did ever hear if it ever lived, but its parents were killed in the shelter, and it was sitting on the knee of the mother.
Something like it's more killed in the shelters.
Well, there was those people that we knew that took a girl's father.
This is all family. Before Pearl Harbor. This is what?
Yeah, and
this is in April of 1941.
There was people all over the place. You know, there was people in their homes that were killed, and there was. We were just so. Everybody was so frightened, and then they took the children away, you know, to different places to keep them safe. And they were taken from their parents, and the parents had to stay here because some of them were working. And it was an awful time. It was just an awful time for people because they couldn't. And there was people. Mrs. Wheeler and all's house was all blown up and things. And she talked about. She went down for to see if she could save anything, and people used to go into the homes and take things. And we had to laugh. She said, she went down to our house one time, and she was living with some friends, and she came down to see her home to see if she could bring anything and save anything. She came one day and she said she had been in and looked around it and found out the home was in a mess, and she had forgot about the door being blown off. And she ran back again to close the door after she came out. She forgot about it, the poor woman. We laughed about it. You know, there was some things. And there was a lot of things that we were looking about. Everything was lying all over the streets. And the soldiers had to be brought in to stop anybody from...
Yeah. Did you ever think of leaving Ireland during that time? Or?
No, I wasn't, because why would I leave? We couldn't find my father for 3 days. He wasn't found. That was Tuesday, and it was Friday whenever I came down out of it, and he was found. His body was found. Soldiers had found it, and I had to go up to identify it. And then, of course, when I identified it, my mother was in the house that night under wood. The beams of the house, you know, were falling down her and Richard, and it was 2 hours. Rich Douglas. Forgive me if I talk, my mind's confused. But anyhow, they had to be, the men had to be sent for to cut the boards and all from it, and she didn't want them to waste their time. The planes were still going over. She would tell them, to leave her alone and to go on to other people and save them and all. She didn't want them to be wasting their time with her. But they got her out and they sent her to the hospital.
How badly was she hurt?
Well, she was, they wouldn't take her to the hospital. She was seen to, and Richard was taken up there, but he was released. And they had her.
Keep saying.
Douglas was released, and he went up for to get safe out Aggie and them, and we had a time with finding them because they were looking for us and we were looking for them, and the places were all burning around about us, and the people were all just running to and fro looking for people that they had lost, couldn't find, and there was a lot of people were just.
Well, we heard enough of the destruction. Well, why don't you tell them about the experience you had in the hospital when you saw your father? Tell them that, and
that's a long time apart.
I know.
My mother,
Where did you move after
we saw
this?
to my father, we buried him and all. And
Where's he buried?
he was buried in the Shankill graveyard that we're not allowed to go into anymore. It's closed up because it's filled up, you know. And it was one of the oldest graveyards in Belfast. It's next to that St. Matthew's Church, and they were the oldest at that time. And it sort of way was an awful exhausting time for everybody because nobody got rest, and they were seeing the things, and we had no home to go to, and I had to live with this other girl at work. I went and I lived with her until I found out there was a house and nearby. It was all pretty well shot up and all, but they fixed it up and all too, and we.
What street was that on?
That was in Cumberland Street. And it was just.
Do you remember the house number?
Yeah.
What was it?
76.
Remember.
And it
What was the one on Carlos?
32.
32.
And it was. We went into the house. We got my mother home from the hospital up in Lurgan and brought her home, and we brought. She wanted home.
How long was that?
How long was she in the
She
hospital?
was only about a week or so. She didn't want to stay. She was worried about
was
us.
Douglas
How we were.
Oh, Douglas wasn't in the hospital. He was okay, right?
No, he was at home, and he had to go up to Violet's too to stay. And then they brought my mother up there because we had no home or anything to go to. And I stayed with this girl. Aggie and them had to travel down to work back and forth from. And I was all right because I was nearby where I was working. And so it was a sad time for everybody, but we got this house and we hadn't even a chair to sit on when we went into it. We had to wait till they allowed us to get in and all too, and see that it was all right, and then it was, we had to go out all second-hand furniture because we didn't have money enough to buy it, and we didn't get money to help to buy it either. We felt that they didn't allow you for everything, and some of the things we lost were priceless too. Life. And then they sent Douglas over to London. He had to go to London to help to build shelters and things and all. He'd been over there, he was in such a... And he was... he had a leaking ball, and he had to go to hospital, and he died there. And we had to...
In London?
He died in England.
Was he sent home?
He was sent
buried
home in
there?
a coffin, a lead coffin. We had to come home in a boat. And I remember that was an awful the hearse went down, you know, and brought the coffin. And it was an awful.
You didn't know he had died before that?
Well, we had heard that he was, because we had arranged for the burial from, or the hearse to go from the body. The matron of the hospital over there was very nice. She sent us a letter, and they were all very nice to him. He had spoken well of them, you know, Douglas, and so away, and they were trying to be nice, you know, and it was an awful thing to be, and then it was Sunday they brought the body, and it was for that Wednesday, I think we had him buried. He was but I better stop, because the time I could go on and on.
Well, no use starting on me. You need to take it.